No jet in American history has ever been built this fast while staying this invisible. Right now, in St. Louis, a sixth-generation fighter is physically taking shape on a factory floor. Hundreds of workers, real metal, real budget, and still not one confirmed photo exists anywhere on Earth. This is the F-47, and what's being hidden about it is more revealing than anything that's been shown. In 2014, DARPA launched a study called the Air Dominance Initiative. Its conclusion: reshape the future of American air power. Planning a single new fighter jet would not be enough on its own to maintain control of the skies going forward. What was needed instead was an entire network, one advanced crewed fighter working alongside autonomous drones, new sensors, and next-generation weapon systems. By 2015, DARPA was quietly funding fully classified experimental aircraft known as X-planes under a program worth roughly $1 billion. Boeing and Lockheed Martin each built their own demonstrator in near total secrecy from the public. Boeing's aircraft first flew in 2019. Lockheed's followed in 2022. Each logged several hundred flight hours, and almost none of it became public knowledge while it was actually happening in real time. In fact, the public didn't even learn a demonstrator existed until September 2020, when an Air Force official mentioned almost in passing that a full-scale flight demonstrator had broken records. No photo, no specifics, just confirmation that something extraordinary was already flying above American soil. 5 years later, in March 2025, President Trump personally announced from the Oval Office that Boeing had won the contract to build the aircraft. It finally had a name, the F-47, but by that point, in some form, it had already been flying in total secrecy for years. Here's what separates this program from almost everything the Air Force has ever built. This isn't a concept sitting on a slide deck in some Pentagon briefing room. As of early 2026, manufacturing of the first F-47 airframe is already underway at Boeing's facility in St. Louis. The Air Force has confirmed an aggressive timeline: first flight targeted for 2028, just 3 years after the contract was even awarded. For comparison, the F-22 took 14 years to go from contract award to operational service. The F-35 took even longer than that. By historical standards, this program is moving at a pace the Air Force has rarely, if ever, achieved before. Real metal is being cut on a factory floor right now. Real engineers are clocking in for work every single day. Real money has already been spent, and a great deal more is committed, and in return the public has been shown almost nothing. 2 official renderings, a handful of carefully worded statements from senior Air Force leadership, no test footage of any kind, no walk-around video, no combat configuration images, nothing close to what is typically released at this stage of development, even for a fully classified military aircraft program. Now compare that to China's competing 6th-generation aircraft known publicly as the J-36. China has flown it openly in daylight near populated areas. Civilian spotters have photographed it from multiple angles. Aviation analysts around the world have studied its shape in detail across dozens of published images and videos. Same generation of technology, same level of strategic importance to its country's military planning, and yet 2 completely opposite approaches to letting the rest of the world actually see what's been built and tested. This level of secrecy is not an accident of how the program happens to be run day to day. Air Force officials have confirmed directly and on the record that the secrecy is deliberate strategy. The 2 official renderings released so far were intentionally distorted before anyone outside the program was ever allowed to see them. Air Force Secretary Troy Menck confirmed this himself, speaking publicly at a defense conference. He said he expects foreign intelligence analysts are spending a great deal of time studying that image and wish them luck trying to dig anything genuinely useful out of it. In plain terms, the Air Force released images they fully expect China's intelligence services to study closely, and made absolutely sure those images would lead any serious analysis in the wrong direction entirely. This is not a new idea in American military aviation. The same general playbook was used decades earlier with the F-117 stealth fighter and the B-2 stealth bomber, both of which stayed almost entirely out of public view for years before a single clear image ever surfaced anywhere. The F-22 itself went through a milder version of that same process back in the 1990s. But the F-47 may be taking this approach further than any program that came before it. In June 2026, a mysterious tailless aircraft was reportedly spotted flying near Area 51, the same general region long associated with classified American flight testing programs. Analysts speculated it could be one of the NGAD demonstrators caught briefly on camera, but even that sighting settled almost nothing conclusively. Some analysts pointed out that the aircraft didn't fully match the 2 official renderings released earlier, which itself strongly suggests those renderings were probably never meant to be accurate representations in the first place. Sometimes the secrecy nearly breaks entirely on its own by accident, without any leak or sighting involved at all. In February 2026, Pratt & Whitney released a corporate promotional video for their XA-103 engine, the same engine specifically being developed up to power the F-47 for a brief moment. Only a few seconds the footage showed a CGI rendering of a tailless stealth fighter with a sharp delta wing and a high-set bubble cockpit. It looked remarkably close to what defense analysts had long believed the F-47 might actually resemble in real life. Aviation experts split almost immediately into two competing camps. Some believed Pratt & Whitney's own video editors had made an enormous billion-dollar mistake, accidentally showing the world something it was never supposed to see this early. Others argued the differences between that CGI render and the two official Air Force images were deliberate and intentional, that the entire moment was simply another carefully constructed layer of the same misdirection strategy dressed up to look like a corporate accident rather than a calculated move. Nobody outside the program actually knows for certain which explanation is correct, and that genuine uncertainty is not a failure of journalism or analysis on anyone's part. It is the exact outcome this level of secrecy is specifically built to produce. Confusion that reaches even the experts who study stealth aircraft design for a living, professionally full-time with decades of experience reading exactly these kinds of signals. When a 30-second corporate engine commercial can spark a full week of serious international aviation debate, you start to understand just how little real information currently exists about this aircraft and how carefully that information gap has been maintained on purpose by people who know precisely what they are doing. So set the mystery aside for a few minutes. What has the Air Force actually confirmed on the record without any real ambiguity attached to it? The F-47 is intended to fully replace the F-22 Raptor as America's primary air superiority fighter. Going forward, the Air Force plans to acquire at least 185 of them over the coming years. It's expected to have a combat radius beyond 1,000 nautical miles, which is significantly farther than an F-22 can fly on a single mission without aerial refueling. Top speed is expected to exceed Mach 2, putting it solidly among the fastest fighter aircraft ever built for frontline service. Unlike the F-22 or the F-35, the F-47 isn't designed to fight entirely alone in the sky. Air Force leadership has used one very specific word to describe its pilot's new role inside the cockpit: quarterback. The aircraft is meant to fly alongside an entire fleet of autonomous drones called collaborative combat aircraft, directing them in real time during a mission rather than doing all of the actual fighting. By itself, some early estimates suggest a single F-47 could eventually coordinate as many as 5 to 8 of these drones during one combat sortie. Its engine, the XA-103, built by Pratt & Whitney, uses what engineers call a 3-stream adaptive cycle design, meaning it can shift its internal airflow depending entirely on the mission profile, switching between a high-thrust mode for raw speed and a fuel-efficient mode for long-range cruising without ever needing two separate engines to accomplish both. As for cost, early 2024 estimates place the price near $300 million per aircraft, roughly 3 times the unit cost of an F-35. That price tag was a major part of why the entire program was paused for a deep cost review before Boeing was ultimately selected as the winner the following year. Here is the single idea that ties this entire program together into one coherent strategy. In modern air combat, the side that detects the enemy first and fires first usually wins the engagement before the other side even fully realizes what is happening to them. Air Force doctrine has an established name for this advantage. First look, first shot stealth technology is how a jet earns that advantage directly in the air in real time during an actual engagement. But there's a second, much quieter version of that same exact principle, and it applies long before any aircraft ever takes off for a real combat mission. If an adversary doesn't know what your aircraft actually looks like, doesn't know its true performance numbers with any confidence, and can't train its own pilots or sensor operators against an accurate model of it, you've gained an advantage that has nothing to do with radar-absorbing coatings or precise airframe shaping at all. You've effectively turned their entire planning process into pure guesswork. That is exactly why the renderings were deliberately distorted before public release. That is why test flights happen far from public roads, far from civilian cameras, deep inside restricted airspace. That is why a 30-second corporate engine commercial accidentally or not showing a brief CGI render became international aviation news for an entire week straight. None of this is incidental or accidental in any meaningful sense. Every piece of it is a calculated decision made by people who understand exactly what information is genuinely worth protecting and exactly how much confusion is worth deliberately creating on purpose. The secrecy isn't simply protecting some secret weapon sitting quietly behind a hangar door somewhere out in the Nevada desert. The secrecy itself has become a weapon in its own right, one that is already being used right now today, long before the aircraft has even completed its first official flight. Picture it again the exact same way we opened a fighter jet right now in the middle of 2026 being assembled piece by piece on a factory floor in St. Louis, Missouri. Hundreds of people walking onto that floor every single day building some something the rest of the world has not been allowed to see clearly in detail from any meaningful angle. And still no confirmed photograph exists anywhere on Earth, not from a civilian spotter with a long lens, not from a commercial satellite pass, not from a leak, a whistleblower, or a disgruntled contractor. That detail is no longer something to simply skip past quickly on the way to the next fact. It may be the single clearest signal available right now about how seriously the Air Force is treating this particular aircraft and how much real value it places on the simple advantage of not being seen at all. Every other sixth-generation fighter program currently underway anywhere in the world has eventually shown at least part of its hand. China's J-36 has been flown openly in daylight and photographed extensively from the ground. Europe's joint program has released concept imagery and physical mock-ups for public display. Even America's own past stealth aircraft, the F-117, the B-2, and the F-22 were each eventually revealed, photographed, and studied openly long before reaching this same stage of development. The F-47 has not followed that familiar pattern at all. Every part of that ongoing silence has been a deliberate decision made at the highest levels of Air Force leadership, not some accident of timing or bureaucratic delay. And the fact that this strategy has worked this well for this long against some of the most capable intelligence services on the entire planet is itself a quiet kind of confirmation. Confirmation that whatever is actually being built behind that silence is something genuinely worth this much sustained effort to protect.